Eu presupun că
I believe that those who wanted to attend are already here. Those who are still in discussions will join us later, probably.
Astăzi s-ar cuveni, de fapt, s-ar fi cuvenit să începem ziua
Today we probably should have started the day with
rememorarea, însemnarea unui eveniment
marking
care a marcat
an event
istoria umanității.
that was very important for the history of mankind.
Am să vă amintesc despre faptul că
And I would like to remind you that on the 11th of September, 23 years ago, several persons went to work in the towers in New York. 343 people, firefighters, police officers, and other people went to work, and their life ended at 10 o'clock. So 21 years later, another terrorist started a war against Ukraine. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact number of victims caused by Vladimir Putin when he started the war, but at some point probably we will know. And they will see the accusations, although maybe we won't get to that stage. In the memory of these victims, I would like to have a moment of silence. Thank you. This is related to what we are discussing today, because impunity, lack of justice starts from harmless things to serious things, and Russia is giving us the most eloquent example in this sense. Despite the sanctions, despite the interdictions, the Russians managed to bring war materials from the western part of the world. And those who are facilitating this trade are corrupt persons. Today we will discuss this topic further. And now I would like to invite you to listen to the speech of William Browder, Sir William Browder, who founded and is the executive manager of Hermitage Capital Management, the hand of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, and author of Red Notice and Freezing Order, a true story of money laundering, murder, and surviving Vladimir Putin's wrath. He benefited, so he can take part in our discussions via a video. So let's see the discourse, the speech.
Hi, my name is Bill Browder, and I'm very honored and pleased to be presenting today at the Justice and Anti-Corruption Reforms Forum. I thought it would be useful for me to share a little bit of my story because this feeds into why the work you're all doing is so important. I'm known for many things, but the thing that I'm most known for is something called the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act was named after my Russian lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, who was murdered in Russian police custody on November 16, 2009. Sergei was murdered because he uncovered a $230 million Russian government corruption scheme in which a number of organized criminals and Russian government officials together stole $230 million from the Russian government of taxes that my firm had paid to the Russian government in the previous year. Sergei was my lawyer. He exposed the corruption, the scheme. He was then arrested by some of the principal actors in this scheme. He was put in pretrial detention. He was tortured for 358 days. And he was killed, as I mentioned, on November 16, 2009 at the age of 37. And for me, his murder was one of the most traumatic and upsetting things that could ever happen. And I went on a mission to get justice for Sergei. And at first I tried to get justice inside of Russia. And as you might imagine, there was no appetite for that at all. They circled the wagons. Putin personally got involved in covering up the murder. They gave promotions and state honors to some of the people who were most complicit. And in the most shocking miscarriage of justice, they put Sergei Magnitsky on trial after they killed him in the first ever trial against a dead man in the history of Russia. It became obvious that we couldn't get any justice inside of Russia. So I said, how do we get justice outside of Russia? And that's when I came up with this idea of the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act is a piece of legislation which freezes the assets and bans the visas of kleptocrats and human rights violators from Russia. I proposed this in Washington in 2010, and I got the backing of Senator Benjamin Cardin. He was a Democrat from Maryland, and Senator John McCain, Republican from Arizona. And they came up as the sponsors of the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act was ultimately passed in December of 2012. Vladimir Putin went out of his mind in response to the Magnitsky Act. Vladimir Putin is a man who commits terrible human rights abuses for money. He's accumulated more money than perhaps any other world leader. And he values money more than human life. And all of a sudden, his money was potentially at risk in the West. He retaliated by banning the adoption of Russian orphans by American families. He made repealing the Magnitsky Act his single largest foreign policy priority. And then he went after me, chasing me around the world with death threats, kidnapping threats, 8 Interpol arrest warrants, extradition requests, etc. And so it's clear that we had found Putin's Achilles heel. There are now not just the United States, but Canada has a Magnitsky Act, the UK has a Magnitsky Act, the EU has a Magnitsky Act, Australia, Canada, etc. There's now 35 countries with Magnitsky Acts around the world, and it's turned out to be one of the most valuable new legislative tools for fighting kleptocracy and human rights abuse. It no longer just applies to Russia, it also applies to other rogue regimes. China has now been sanctioned for the Uyghur genocide. Officials in Nicaragua, Venezuela, various other places who do terrible things have also been sanctioned. The second main area that we worked on to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky, and this is what's particularly relevant for this gathering today, is looking for who got the money. How did the $230 million flow, and where did it go to? And for 10 years, I, together with my colleague Vadim Kleiner, who's actually at your conference today, have been working on finding out who got the money. And over a 10-year period, we figured out who got the money. and where did it go to, and how did it go? And particularly relevant for this conference today is that a lot of the money, the first stop was Moldova. The money went to Moldova, and then from Moldova it went to places like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Cyprus, and then on to what we call destination countries like France, the UK, United States, where the money was used to purchase high-end real estate and other luxury goods. And so as we were looking for the money, we had one very big discovery in addition to the Moldova discovery, which is that a lot of the money, first in Moldova, but then second, the first major Western port of call was Danske Bank in Estonia. I'm sure many of you will remember the Danske Bank scandal. What we discovered was that 200 million of the $230 million of stolen tax money was laundered through Danske Bank through their Estonian branch. Whenever we find money going to any of these countries, we file criminal complaints. And we filed criminal complaints in Estonia against Danske Bank. And when we do file criminal complaints, they often get a lot of media attention. And this one for sure did. And because of this media attention, we ended up getting a call from a journalist in Copenhagen working for the Berlingske newspaper. And they told us that they had just gotten a huge data leak from Danske Bank. And the data leak was very interesting, but they didn't know how to figure out what was what in this huge data leak. They didn't know what was dirty money or clean money or whatever. But they contacted us and they said, could you hand over your information about the Magnitsky case? And then we can look at the accounts and we can look at the routing and we can look at all different other information and try to make some sense of this huge data leak that we had. And so we handed over our information. And what we ended up getting back was a few days later, they ran our information through their database. They said it wasn't just 200 million of dirty money from Russia flowing through Danske Bank. From your information, they told us, and from their own data leak, they were able to determine that it was $8.3 billion of dirty money flowed through Danske Bank. Now, Denmark is a country which prides itself on its integrity and honesty. It's ranked number 2 in the world by Transparency International as the second most transparent and honest country. And the CEO of the bank couldn't just let it stand that there was a major newspaper reporting $8.3 billion of dirty money flowing through their bank. And so they had to bring in an external accounting firm, an external law firm, an external data analysis firm to figure out what the real situation was. And they did their analysis, and they came back about a year later, and they said it wasn't $8.3 billion that was laundered through Danske Bank. It was $232 billion laundered through Danske Bank. It's a shocking number. And what's even more shocking in my mind is that this amount of money was what we were able to determine when we could lift the hood on one medium-sized Scandinavian bank. So if we were able to do the same exercise at Raiffeisen in Vienna, which we can't do, or Deutsche Bank or UBS in Switzerland, or Credit Suisse and UBS in Switzerland, and Deutsche Bank in Germany, ABN AMRO, I think we would come up with a number close to $1 trillion of money stolen from the Russian people and laundered through all these Western banks. And what makes this so important for the world is that the money that was stolen was money that should have been spent on hospitals and schools and roads and public services. Instead, it was spent on private jets and yachts and villas in the south of France. And as time goes on, the amount of money was so large, $1 trillion, that Putin had himself a terrible dilemma, which is that at some point the Russian people were going to come for him. He didn't know what that point would be, but he knew that eventually, if everybody is in destitute poverty and a few people are living in absolute luxury, the whole system is going to come undone. And so Putin didn't wait for that moment to happen. He decided to try to preempt that. How did he preempt it? Well, straight out of Machiavelli, he finds a foreign enemy and starts a war. And that's what the war in Ukraine is all about. It's not about NATO enlargement. It's not about destiny of the Russian Empire. This was about a little man who's stolen too much money and is afraid of his own people. And this is why the investigation into dirty money, the reform of the banking system so that this can't happen again, and Moldova's role in this is so important, because it's not just about dirty money, it's about world peace. And if these loopholes get closed, it means that it's not just about law enforcement, it's about potentially preventing a humanitarian disaster. And that's why this is so important. That's why there's a lot of work to be done in Moldova, and I'm very glad to have an opportunity to share this story with you, and hopefully some reform will come from these conversations, this conference, and this agenda. Thank you very much.
Este cât se poate de relevant acest discurs.
This speech is very relevant in the context of the topic of our panel, as it is mentioned, the inspirational stories and achievements in justice, in anti-corruption, and the Magnitsky Act and the involvement of Moldova are also important. I would like to mention that was revealed accidentally. It is not comparing. We cannot compare it to Magnitsky. He went to these actions being aware of the consequences. In 2012, Sorin Paciu was shot during a hunt, and this information ended up in the media, and this is how we found out that this was a royal hunt that was attended by the prosecutor general and other high officials. Mr. Crețu was the only one convicted, and the authorities looked like nothing happened. It's just some friends who went to hunt. And mass media, especially Alina Radu, who will be here in front of you, was saying that this is proof that one hand washes the other. And together they discuss about things such as the ones Sir William told us about. So there are no insignificant episodes in the fight against corruption. Like, we also have the famous laundromat, where they found a loophole to use the dirty money. We've reached another session of the second day of the forum, and as usually, we will first listen to some useful information that will be presented by Andrei Naso, legal advisor with the Center of Legal Resources, and then we'll have the Vox Populi.
Bună ziua, stimați
Good afternoon, dear participants to the forum, both here in the room and online. I have the honor of being here in front of you at the fourth panel, the last one of the forum for justice and anti-corruption reforms. And here we will be discussing about inspirational stories and achievements in justice and anti-corruption. People say that there is no evil without good, and after rain, the sun will come out. And I would like to tell you about two stories that are very sad, actually tragic even, but they are at the same time inspirational stories, because these tragic events stimulated the fight to protect and promote human rights, to protect the freedom of expression for mass media, and not only, and also stimulated the fight against large-scale corruption. The first story relates to Daphne Caruana Galizia. Probably many of you know this personality. She was a journalist, writer, and anti-corruption activist from Malta. She was very well known due to her investigations on corruption and organized crime, which she wrote about on her personal blog. Also, she mentioned different crimes related to money laundering, different connections between high-ranking officials, and so on. She also had an important role in the Panama Papers scandal. Unfortunately, she was assassinated with cruelty on the 16th October 2017. At the moment of the murder, she was involved in 40 cases where she was the defendant, and these were related to her professional activity. Obviously, this murder shocked the international community and generated the protests. People went out to the streets and they asked for justice for Daphne Caruana Galizia, but they also asked for the legislation to be strengthened in order to protect journalists and their freedom of expression, and to not allow their intimidation through criminal cases. This led to the anti-SLAPP legislation. It is related to public participation. This is related to actions that influence the freedom of expression for journalists, for the academia, or other people who want to talk about important topics in public. The European Parliament, the Council of the EU adopted different resolutions and recommendations on this, but the most important anti-SLAPP document is the anti-SLAPP directive, also known as Daphne's Law. It includes different provisions. You can see them on the screen, and member states need to add them to the national legislation to ensure real protection for the freedom of expression of journalists. EU member states have 2 years to transpose these measures meant to protect the freedom of expression. Another case was already mentioned, so I will be brief. This is about the Russian lawyer and taxation advisor, Sergei Magnitsky. As mentioned, in 2007, he discovered fraud of $230 million. He witnessed, he made declarations against the corrupt civil servants. He was arrested and subjected to torture in 2008, and in 2009 he died in prison. The official case of death was heart insufficiency, but actually it was related to his imprisonment. And this led to the fact that different laws were adopted. In 2012, the Congress of the United States passed the Magnitsky Law, and this is meant to prosecute those involved in the murder of Magnitsky. This was extended in 2016 at the global level through the Global Magnitsky Act. This imposes sanctions for all entities all around the world if they are involved in high-level corruption or they violate human rights in a very serious manner. This legislation was transposed by different other countries such as Canada, the United Kingdom, the EU. Now I would like to mention that as we can see, certain tragic and sad events can lead to very important changes. It is up to us to find the motivation, the inspiration to generate this change, to build a world that is more free, more fair, and that is without corruption. Thank you, and we wish you an inspirational panel. Thank you, and of course, each time we hear the name Daphne or Magnitsky, we should not forget that behind these stories, there are terrorists, there are causes. Just like on the 11th of September, people did not just die, and behind all those victims in Ukraine, there's a terrorist action which we hope will be punished appropriately. Now we have the Vox Populi from our colleagues from National TV, and we hope this will help us get inspired for this reform. Let's hear what success stories might mobilize.
Considerați că corupția trebuie eradicată sau este un rău necesar?
Corupția, evident, trebuie eradicată, e crimă.
Nu este necesar, sigur 100% nu este necesar și cred că toți care fac parte din aceasta lucrează pentru a omite corupția.
Eu cred că asta e puțin imposibil. Eu au fost existent pe tot parcursul istoriei și mereu au fost biasul ăsta că dacă ești cunoscutul meu, eu pe tine te promovez și să fii scoasă acum într-o secundă e puțin imposibil.
Unul, consider că corupția nu va fi niciodată eradicată. Nu există stat fără corupție. Corupția va fi redusă substanțial doar dacă sunt implicați din ambele părți. Adică nu doar cei ce primesc banii, dar și cei ce dau bani. Ar trebui să nu facă lucrul ăsta.
Trebuie eliminată din sistem, dar practic au arătat că se luptă permanent.
Corupția e un fel de care în permanent să existe, în orice țară. Dar în orice țară e la nivel diferit. Sigur că în Moldova e din anii 90 la un nivel maxim, dar deja eu consider că suntem în scădere.
Corupțiile, unii vorbesc de volume mari, de bani mari. Aceia întotdeauna se iasă. Acei mititei care se duce la un lăsător, se duce la un medic, un mic prezent, asta nu e corupție.
Noi am denunțat de multe ori actele este, dar așa și stăm pe loc, adică suntem amendați să fac dosare la comandă, nu se rezolvă nicio întrebare. Eu v-am spus că am apelat la toate instanțele, la toate, și la ANSA, și la Poliția Generală, și la Procuratură, și la Poliția sectorului Ciocana, unde locuiesc. Și dau din umeri, din cap și poate să rezolvați.
Ei între atâția de mulți că să te duci în instanțe, tu n-ai să ai timp pentru lucru, pentru viața personală. Dar de a avea timp liber, eu aș îmbla numai în instanțe să-i scoatem din lucru.
Să luăm un caz foarte simplu, de exemplu, să meargă vorba despre o judecată în care este iertat o persoană care de fapt ea este de vină. Iată, atunci cred că este unul din puținele cazuri care ar putea fi demascate și scoase în evidență.
Cred că într-adevăr se încalcă și se abuzează la nesfârșit, chiar uneori ne implicăm.
Am denunțat odată și copilul meu a suferit foarte tare.
Da, pentru că, bineînțeles, pentru noi cetățenii, cele mai mari acte de corupție sunt la nivelul instituțiilor medicale.
Eu personal nu am avut și nu am denunțat. În situația în care vor fi, evident că suntem obligați să denunțăm asemenea acte.
N-am avut ocazia să... nici n-am corupt pe cineva.
One more, by the way, when we see how Putin is putting to jail Shoigu's generals, it is a kind of paradox. Medvedev and Putin use stolen money, living in their luxury villas, accused of corruption Shoigu's generals, and this show, of course, takes place in plain sight, and everybody is aware that the reason for imprisoning them are totally different. This discussion is very long, but for the population of the Republic of Moldova, that is some of them that are still wondering what direction the country should take, this situation is a relevant textbook of how unsuccessful story looks like, and hopefully on the basis of this experience they will take the right decision for the country, for the future of the country and for the future of our children, because we know, our generation, we know what to choose, because we have experience during the Soviet period, whereas young people deserve to have another fortune. And during the break I was talking to my colleagues from the Center of Legal Resources, that it's time for our people to decide the future of our country. Because during a certain election, there was a movement, hide the passport, the ID card of your grandmother and grandfather. So, of course, we should not go to such extremes, but that was a practical example of people trying to look for solutions. But let's address now the topic of the last session. I invite Vadim Kleiner, Director of Research and Investigation Campaign for Justice, Sergei Magnitsky, Hermitage Capital Management, Alina Radu, director, co-founder of Ziarul de Gardă, which is one of the well-known journalists that has been an investigative journalist all her life. Drago Kos will join us online. He's a member of the Independent Anti-Corruption Consultative Committee Moldova. Emilia Șercan, investigative journalist and teacher in the Bucharest University of Romania. She was declared as the enemy of the Romanian security by Victor Ponta and his gang. And tonight we'll have the possibility to talk to her as the writer of a book where she describes these events. Again, online, we'll be joined by Andrei Borovic, Executive Director, Transparency International Ukraine. So, Mr. Kleiner, please, you have the floor to tell us more about inspirational stories.
Thank you. Excellent. So I suppose I have about 20 minutes or so let me try to do it fast. So effectively, let me tell you a little bit about our story. As we know now, after 14 years of this investigation, that we became a target of quite important criminal organization, highly infiltrated in the Russian government. As you could see on this chart, there are people representing different branches of power, both individuals outside of the government and inside the government, which is FSB, Interior Ministry, Prosecutor Office, judges, and tax officials. So actually, as we know now, the whole story started when the key members of this criminal organization decided to travel together on holiday in May 2007 to discuss the future crime. Actually, the first part was the head of this criminal organization, the Russian banker named Dmitry Kluyev, who flew on a private jet and kindly invited the Lieutenant Colonel of Moscow Interior Ministry, Artyom Kuznetsov, to fly with him to Cyprus. 2 days later, they were joined by two lawyers working for Dmitry Kluyev, named Andrei Pavlov and Yulia Mayorova, and another policeman who will be very important in this case, Major Pavel Karpov. And finally, they were joined by the nice family of the head of the Russian tax office number 28 and her husband, Vladlen. During this nice trip, they discussed how the future crime will take place. This is the extract from the US Department of Justice resolution. So what's happened next was summer, June 2007, when one of these travelers who enjoyed private jet trip, Artyom Kuznetsov, led the searching office of Hermitage Moscow office and its lawyers, where thousands of documents has been confiscated, specifically corporate seals, original charters, and other documents needed to manage the companies. So, as we soon discovered with the help of Sergei Magnitsky, this search resulted in change of ownership of fund subsidiaries, which were re-registered from HSBC, the English bank, to some unknown company named Pluton. Pluton was owned by the former convicted criminal, the guy who murdered someone several years prior and spent several sentences in prison. But how would it be possible to re-register companies to somebody's ownership? In order to do that, you need corporate seal, original charter, original certificate of tax registration, and other documents. And who had these documents is these two police officers who were traveling during this nice vacation in May 2007. So what we learned next was even more shocking. Actually, it pretty much reminds you what had happened later on in Moldova. So the 3 stolen subsidiaries of the fund were sued on 3 different jurisdictions in Russia with the various lawsuits. In these lawsuits, some unknown shell companies which didn't have any financial records or any business whatsoever were suing the fund subsidiaries, allegedly saying these contracts were fabricated, that fund subsidiaries promised several years prior to supply certain shares of Gazprom, and did not supply these shares, and meanwhile share price increased dramatically, like several times, and because of that they owe foregone profit. So it was completely pay-per-one profit, foregone profit, which they claimed, and it was as big as several hundred millions. What is interesting that in the court, the stolen companies were represented by other members of the criminal organization, lawyers Pavlov, Mayorov, and others. And during this hearing, they did not defend the companies, but played in concert with those who were plaintiff, and hereby confirmed that all the charges and all these fake losses were real. As a result of that, the judges issued decisions, it reminds you something, which justified the debt to unknown companies of almost $1 billion. So why do they need this debt? They need this debt because 1 year prior to that, fund subsidiaries paid exactly the same amount, or had exactly the same amount of profit, which they paid a profit tax to the government funds. And so what was done by the criminals, they took these court decisions and filed the amended tax return, saying that original 1 billion profit should be deducted with the newly formed losses. And therefore, the amended tax return was filed, and they requested back from the Russian budget 230 million. And believe you or not, who approved this decision is another traveler to Cyprus, this nice lady, Olga Stepanova, head of the tax office, number 28. So, and who received the money? The money went wired to the small bank, minuscule bank, which was like 500 something number in Russia, named Universal Savings Bank, but it was owned by head of this criminal organization, Dmitry Kluyev, who orchestrated the whole trip to Cyprus. We hired a Russian lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, and other lawyers to investigate the crime. He even provided testimonies against the officials involved, helped to file various complaints, but in retaliation, he was accused himself, put in prison, and spent, as Bill already mentioned today, 358 days in quite torturous conditions, and finally, as we believe, was murdered in November, on 16th of November 2009. Since that moment, we started what we named Sergei Magnitsky Justice Campaign. And this justice campaign was specifically targeting the money which he ultimately lost his life for. Let me tell you several stories. The first significant revelation was about 2 Moldovan companies, as you could see at the bottom of this, and you could see flow of funds starting from the illegal tax rebate down through various layers of money laundering to the 2 companies registered in Banco de Economie, which, each of which received 26 million, which were then laundered further. And all this equation is pretty much a resemble of what was happening, and was probably a small training of what you saw later on as a Moldova laundromat. After that, from Moldova, this money were immediately distributed further to Cyprus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and other countries. And as we understand the whole system of this laundromat, how it was structured, you could see on this picture. So effectively, if you look at the theory of money laundering, it explains here in a perfect way. So you could see placement stage, when under the fake false pretext, money left Russian budget and were transferred to the bank accounts controlled by criminals. This was a placement stage of money laundering. Then there are multiple layers or multiple stages of layering, where they need to hide the origin of these criminal funds. And you could see the Russian layer where almost 12 banks were involved and more than 100 accounts. And after layering through Russian accounts, it was layering stage number 2. And you could see Moldova here and other, as we name them, neighborhood republics. So usually former Soviet Union republics, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and so on. Then the very important layer number 3, when this money are touching European territory, so new members of the European Union were accepting this money, which make it much easier for further transfers because it would be inside EU transfers. And here you could see Cyprus, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. And finally, the integration stage, when this money, this corrupt money, finally reached their destination. Would it be Swiss accounts, French villas, Luxembourg accounts, Monaco, and so on and so forth. So let me tell you some of the examples of successful investigation. So here you could see the flow of funds which reached the account of this nice family of the tax official who received this money. So as you remember, she was responsible for authorizing this payment. And after this multiple layering, the money ended up through the banker who was working with them, the Credit Suisse accounts, which were controlled by her husband, Vladlen Stepanov. In total, almost 12 million were wired in this manner to the Swiss account of her husband. It took quite a few years for Swiss authorities. We filed the criminal case back in 2011, and the case was opened. And then in July 2021, final resolution was issued by the Office of Attorney General of Switzerland, which indeed confirmed that the criminal funds which came from this, originated from this crime, end up on the Swiss account, and they ordered that almost 4 million of Swiss francs should be confiscated from this crime. Another case of another relative of the Russian government official is depicted here. And this is actually a flowchart produced by US Department of Justice. We filed a complaint back in 2012 with US Department of Justice, and they opened investigation in September 2013. What they found, that this family of the Russian government official named Pyotr Katsiv actually acquired certain real estate in Manhattan using the money which went through the long chain of money laundering. And this property was arrested by US authorities. After 4 years of investigation, on the doorsteps of the court, when the case should be considered in the court, it was signed a settlement when the defendant paid almost 6 million fine for this crime, which was 3 times of the amount identified by US Department of Justice. Another story concerned Latvian authorities. As you could see, again, the money was flowing from the crime down to the Latvian territory, and specifically in this case, this money was used to buy property in Latvia, in Riga, which provided an opportunity for people who did it to have a residence in the country. And so in these 2 particular cases, the Latvian authorities identified after our complaints these properties, seized, and after the court decision confiscated these properties in midst of Riga. Another big case which was mentioned today by Bill was at Danske Bank, where we found quite a few, 21 accounts at Danske Bank which were involved in laundering the process of 230 million fraud. Together with investigative journalists from Danske, from Berlinske and OCCRP, we managed to investigate it further, make a big data analysis, which resulted in finding that as much as 9 billion in total, according to the Berlinske investigation, was laundered through the Danske Bank Estonia. And this became a real blast in the history of Denmark, where the biggest financial institution was accused in $1 billion of money laundering, while its small branch in Estonia. Further investigation, which they were forced to do under the public pressure, identified that as much as 200 billion euros were laundered through Estonian branch of Danske Bank for the 8 years of its existence, which was bigger sometimes than the GDP of Estonia for certain years. So, after long years of investigation, finally, Danske Bank pled guilty with the US authorities. They acknowledged that almost $160 billion went through the US financial system of dirty money. And finally, they agreed to pay of $2 billion of settlement fee, which was distributed to US, Danish, and Estonian authorities. Meanwhile, Estonian authorities, after long years of investigation and our complaint, which became a foundation of this investigation along with other crimes, opened a criminal case which is currently in the court of Estonia as we speak, where they accused the local management of Danske Bank in laundering $1.6 staggering billion, which they could prove their involvement in. And this case is still emblematic, and we are waiting for its resolution. Another big case happened in Latvia, where the biggest Latvian bank, ABLV, was brought to justice, and its managers and shareholders are behind bars. And again, the case is now under consideration of 2.1 billion euros. And again, our complaint was one of the foundation of this investigation as well. Finally, I would like to mention another case which was developed for many years in Spain, the place where many Russians, especially with the different type of criminal money, decided to park it in the form of various real estate purchases. This investigation started back in 2018 and ended up in December 2022 with the joint announcement of Spanish authorities and Europol about arresting of over 75 properties across mainland and island worth 25 million euros. This case is developing again as we speak. And finally, I would like to show you some example to make it more picturesque. So one of the recipients of these funds in Spain was a woman named Anna Kurepina, of 80 years old. And this nice lady received as much as 12 million to her Spanish accounts. So this money was used to buy these luxury villas next to the sea, which is in the most prestige areas nearby Girona. What is interesting that this money she received as a loan. So 80 years old women received a loan. It was a very nice loan, not really pledged by any property, but it was quite generous, although loan interest was 5%, but a loan duration was 10 years. So they really believed in this woman that she could repay this loan. To make it more easier for her, the loan terms were that she shouldn't repay any loan or interest during the term until the 10 years will pass, when she will be congratulated with her 90th year anniversary with the repayment of this loan. So we tried to make some calculations, and it took us to find out that the average pensioner, it took this person probably about 250 years to repay only the interest on this loan, and about 5,000 years or 4,800 to repay the whole loan. But we definitely underestimate this smart old lady. It turned out that according to her reporting, she earned as much as more than 2.5 million in 2007. And it turned out that it came from two companies. One of them brought her $500,000 and the other 2 million. So, and it was a really smart investment. You could not even imagine. So, for example, she invested in July 2006 120 euros, and the dividend for the next year from this company alone was as much as 463,000. And the other investment was even smarter, because at the last day of 2006, she invested another savings of 100 euros, which brought her next year as a dividend 2.1 million. So this kind of business genius such a good opportunity that another offshore company next year on her 81st anniversary granted her another loan for another 10 years with exactly the same terms. So a skeptical observer could say that the remarkable financial success actually connected to her son-in-law, Vladimir Artyukhov, deputy of Sergei Chemezov, head of Rostec, and also the former governor of Samara region. And moreover, the whole kind of equation and flow of money is also connected to one of the discoveries in Panama Papers about the guy named Sergei Raldugin, which was so close to Mr. Putin. So as a conclusion, I would like to say that money laundering system created by Russian officials across former Soviet Union became the most probably advanced and dangerous network of corruption in the world. And they laundered probably hundreds of billions, which actually not only helped corrupt officials to buy luxury properties and use luxury life, but also influence in the West by political leaders, by political influence, and by strategic assets. And it's extremely important to confront this export of corruption, which is the most dangerous and the biggest export from Russia probably compared to anything else. And despite all these challenges, I call to bring those perpetrators to justice, because if those who assisted in this money laundering are not brought to justice, they will migrate and reinvent themselves in other jurisdictions, in other institutions, and continue to do exactly the same. Thank you.
Mulțumim.
Thank you, dear Vadim Kleiner. I have a short question on this. The Magnitsky Act is mainly concerned with punishing those who steal the money of Russian citizens from the state budget. But to what extent you who unveiled these schemes can help the member states of the Western Committee to stop these banks who took part in these operations, because without their contributions, the contribution of banks from countries with a good reputation, the Russians would be powerless.
I completely agree with you, and there are the whole category of so-called enablers without whom it would not be possible to do that. Specifically, one example which was mentioned is Danske Bank, and we assisted authorities in a big share for them to succeed in pursuing this bank, and this is quite unprecedented when the bank of that size has actually pled guilty. If you look at the history, usually the authorities maximum they could achieve is just settlement without acknowledgement of any guilt. And the Danske Bank acknowledged its guilt in laundering these billions. And we continue to do so. Just 1 week ago, Nordea Bank also signed a settlement agreement with US authorities and paid 35 million penalty for money laundering or violating money laundering rules. And they specifically, US authorities, stated that Hermitage efforts were crucial in achieving this. So yes, you're absolutely right. We need to punish those who were involved. And there are other banks, and that's why we are talking about Danske Bank case in Estonia or ABLV Bank in Latvia. The resolution of these emblematic cases will make a precedent for many other cases.
Thank you.
Now I'm thinking about Ilan Shore after he had this business in Chisinau, should be called in Moscow to continue his activities. So he had his training in Chisinau with the theft of the billion, and now he's in the right place for him. Now it depends on the judiciary whether he's sent to a more fitting place or not. Let's see if we can witness this someday. Maybe Alina Radu will answer this question. Do we have chances to see Ilan Shore in a more fitting place for him, given what he has been involved in? Now we give the floor to Alina Radu, manager of Ziaro de Garda newspaper. Thank you for the question. I will answer along the way. The figures presented by our colleagues were so shocking, but I will move on to smaller stories because we are after lunch, and I'll ask who's tired of all this talking. You'll probably be shy to acknowledge, but we'll discuss about how the judiciary in the Republic of Moldova has changed and what was the contribution of journalists. Because maybe today we'll say that things haven't changed so much. It's September, we have fruit, we have vegetables. Who likes watermelons? Am I the only one? Now imagine that you are accused of stealing 3 watermelons. And I'd like to understand that, well, based on the legislation in the Republic of Moldova, what is the punishment you should get for this theft? Mr. Kirtak, here we have prosecutors, judges. Tell us what would be the correct punishment for a person accused of stealing 3 watermelons. Ion, a fine. How big should it be? Depending on the value. Well, 3 watermelons in September, 5 lei per kilo. What other opinions do you have? I would advise you not to steal watermelons, because the case that reached us was that of a husband and wife who said that they were accused of stealing 3 watermelons. Well, they hadn't murdered anyone. It just happened that 3 watermelons were stolen. And each of these persons had been sentenced to 5 years in prison. And the small child was left alone, basically. The decision had been made by the local court, but also by the Court of Appeal. And we had to write about this, to make some noise, to get involved, and to open this discussion in the society, so that the next decision is one in their favor. It took some time. 12 judges were involved, first in the first instance, then at the Court of Appeal 3 judges, then at the Supreme Court of Justice 3 judges who considered that this should be retried by other judges. So we've discussed about the watermelons, 5 melons, 5 years. Ilan Shore received 7. What is the appropriate punishment for someone accused of stealing some eggs? I see that you are milder. Well, the value of the eggs was higher than the value of the watermelons. These eggs somehow disappeared, and the value was 50,000 lei. The amount was a bit higher, but it was some eggs. No one got murdered, not even the hens. 10 years in prison. When we reached this case, the first sentence that this woman said in prison said, "My family and friends, children come to visit me in prison, and I'm telling them not to bring me any eggs." She was an accountant. The eggs disappeared from a factory. But it's, of course, the leadership was involved, but the women are those who paid the consequences. The others also said that they don't want to eat watermelons anyway. The other is from a village, from a young boy who wanted to eat eggs, watermelons, and so on, but he could not eat because he had a disability from childhood. He could not move his hands or his legs. He was in prison and he had been sentenced to 7 years, just like Shor. What crime do you think such a person who doesn't move and speaks with difficulty had committed? Give me some ideas of crimes. The person is not moving, cannot move his legs or his arms. So this young man, well, his case reached us by accident because his roommates in the penitentiary were upset. They were upset and they were saying we're not paid to feed him. He was together with other inmates. He could not feed himself, clean himself. He couldn't do anything. So he was at the disposal. Well, if the other inmates wanted to help me, that was good. But you understand that this is very difficult, and to help them with washing and so on for 10 years is something important. So the letter was meant to convince the prison to offer the person an assistant or a nurse. We then investigated and found out that if you have money to pay to some investigators, you can make anyone seem guilty. This was a drug trafficking case. And they made sure that this person would not be able to defend himself. He could not speak. His lawyer was only there to be present. Then the case was retried and he was freed. Why am I telling you about these small cases? Because 30 years Moldova has discussed a lot about these large-scale corruption cases. But these small cases have offered the courage to other people to put pressure on the judiciary. Yes, we've discussed about these small scale cases. These are success stories, but it was obvious that something was happening with the judges. We had to do more. You might not know this, but I've been watching the judiciary in Moldova since Moldova was born, and I know a lot of such stories. Maybe you don't know how the palaces of judges were presented in the press. You are young, you don't remember, but you know that they have such mentions. There was a lot of talk about corruption, but nobody could prove how they are corrupt. There was no evidence. So we said, let's start publishing each week on the first page such a mention of a judge or someone else. No one had done this before. We are not very sure that this is legal, and we didn't know in the redaction whether it is correct to present their wealth, because we didn't know what was in store for us. The system was hostile. We were also sued for many articles that we had published. The success story was due to the fact that we had a young team, and we said, let's do it regardless of what happens. And then we published the first story. We had these mentions on the first page. It looked like some books. And the rule in investigative journalism is that if you are accusing someone, you need to ask their opinions on these accusations. And this was making our life complicated because when our journalist called the first judge and said, we are publishing this story about your mansion and you can tell us how you got the money, he was threatened, you will spend your life in court and so on. The second time we had threats again. And this happened again. And the fifth time, the journalist picks up the phone. He was ready to face a new wave of rage and insults. And he said, hello, Mr. Judge. We are publishing a story about your mansion on the first page. And what we heard as an answer was the change. No insult came. He said, yes, now it's my turn. Okay, you can come so I can show you around and tell you about it. So this was the big change. The judges understood that there are some journalists, whether they are good journalists or crazy journalists, that will publish these stories regardless of what you say. And the only option you have is to cooperate and tell them what you want to tell them, be it the truth or a lie, it's up to you. And this is where we understand that journalism has power and we can make some changes. The change was related to the mindset of the judges, but it meant that citizens also understood that we can ask for this, we can publish stories, we can analyze them. So this did not come easily. Maybe you remember this series with the judges from hell, those who in April 2009 went to the prisons during the night and gave a decision within 5 minutes for each case. And we analyzed all the data, and it was obvious that they had committed some crimes against justice and human rights. And we said, but an article won't change anything. And we had 45 articles on one judge. And after the 45th, the miracle happened and he was dismissed. We didn't know how to write so that we should not bore people. We are all bored. We don't want to hear about problems anymore. So 45 articles and the judge was dismissed. Probably we wrote dozens, hundreds of articles about the others, but things are happening. At some point, the court clerks from a court complained that the president of the court was asking for sexual favors. Now we are discussing about sexual abuse and such things, but a few years ago this was a taboo subject. You know that the USA, the US Embassy, the delegation of the EU offer equipment for the courts so that they have copying machine, fax. And this president of the court had moved all this equipment in his office, and whenever the clerks needed to have a copy, and they work with these documents, had to offer these sexual favors to the president. We published the story, and what followed was very trying. He harassed these employees, he sued them, he sued us, he called us, threatened us, and this was already a never-ending story. We were lucky that the people understood that we can say what people talk and so on, and then we started finding out about other irregularities of this president. Someone said that he has a pig farm, and some of the employees are not working in the court but at this farm. And then we wrote about pigs and cows and manure and everything. How long did think it took for him to be dismissed? I want to have an interactive session, so mention your opinions. So it took 6 years, and we kept writing until he was dismissed. So it takes years of our lives. But this doesn't end here. This is a success story. One judge was dismissed. After several years, a couple comes to complain that their rights were violated. And when they come, we ask them, why did you choose to come to us, to understand how they found out about us, and why did they choose us? And they said, do you remember this president of the court? Yes, we do. He's our lawyer, and he said, if you want to be successful, go to Ziarul de Gardă. If they write a story, a good one, then you will be successful. So before that, he was the most important person on earth. He lost everything. He lost his power. He became a simple lawyer. But he did not lose his trust that some journalists are doing their job with integrity, and what they are doing contributes to justice. Is my time up? Yes. Do you believe that Ilan Shore will go to jail? Yes, I do. If I didn't believe in this, I would take my phone and go home and retire, but I'm not giving up. This will not happen soon, but I'm sure that there's a punishment for each criminal. Thank you. I admire your optimism and the fact that you embarked on this difficult mission in a society that we call one in transition. I don't know how long it will take. Now we will give the floor to Drago Kos, member of the Independent Anti-Corruption Advisory Committee of Moldova, who is online.
Hello, can you hear me?
So, your floor.
Okay, so first of all, best regards from Slovenia. I'm honored to be today with you. I almost missed it because I wrongly calculated the time difference, but I'm here now. So, and before I start, I would just like to say that I'll be very, very happy if Alina Radu would never write about me, because I listened to her presentation, so I would not like to appear in her stories, because that would mean that that's my professional end. Now, seriously, when thinking what story to tell you today, I decided to tell you the story of Slovenia and my country and its fight against corruption, because there are some similarities between Slovenia and Moldova, especially in the conditions which appear. Of course, you have many more problems that Slovenia did have and still has, simply because, let's say, of your history, because of your powerful neighbors on the east, and because you have a bit more oligarchs than we do. But I think that we can draw some comparisons, which hopefully will be, let's say, helpful for you too. So Slovenia got the independence back in 1991. Before that, we were a communist country, and after 1991, we became a democratic parliamentary republic. And there we had several political parties, let's say, leading the country. Between 1991, we also had a short so-called war with Yugoslav army, which tried to keep Slovenia in the Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia. But then they realized they're not backed up by the population, and they pulled out, and we finally got the independence. And we were much luckier, let's say, the neighboring Croatia and Bosnia, where the war lasted for several years and required several hundred thousands of casualties. In the beginning, let's say between 91 and 2001 and 2, Slovenia was doing quite fine, basically developing new institutions and so on. At that time, I I moved to the Ministry of Interior. I was the police officer, and I became the first head of the organized crime section, and afterwards the operational head of the criminal investigation directorate. So I was operational chief of approximately 800 criminal investigators. And one of the biggest cases we're dealing with was the case of illegal arms trading, namely when Yugoslav army pulled out in 1991, they left behind thousands of tons of different weapons, ammunition, tanks, and so on, so on. And our politicians started to sell these weapons and ammunition to Croatia and Bosnia. The problem was only that from, let's say, we speak about approximate value of all this stuff was more than $100 million. The only problem is that Slovenia received in the budget for all this stuff only approximately $10 million. The rest went into the private pockets of our politicians and or their political parties. So I was leading the investigative team who was investigating these cases, and back in 1994, our Minister of Defense was forced to resign simply because he tried to interfere in our investigation. He engaged the military special unit to arrest the police informant on the plain road, the civilian, for which the army didn't have any powers at all. And then he was forced to resign. And you can imagine that this was not this doesn't make him particularly happy. But he stayed in very good connections with some Western European countries, especially Germany and the United States of America. Why I'm saying this? Because it's important, because this person came back as the Prime Minister of my country back in 2004. And you have to know that in 1999, and I'm telling this just because you have to know that those who are fighting corruption or face some obstacles sometimes. In 1999, I was forcefully kicked out of the police because the Prime Minister gave the order that they have to be removed from the police because my investigators were investigating the Deputy Prime Minister and two other ministers. So they kicked me out, I pressed charges, I won, they had to pay me a lot of money as compensation, and they were obliged to take me back to the police, but didn't want to go back to the police, which was then already led by the corrupt Director General. In 2004, I became the first chairman of the Slovenian Anticorruption Commission, and just one day before that, my friend, the former Minister of Defense, became the Prime Minister, and of course his first action was to abolish the Independent Anticorruption Commission. 2004 is also a year where Slovenia joined the EU. And I have to say, because this will happen to you too, on the day of the accession, Slovenia was on the peak of its anti-corruption efforts. We had the anti-corruption strategy, we had special anti-corruption law, we had specialized anti-corruption institution, and really the whole country was working hard against corruption simply because EU was acquiring this from us. After the day of the accession, the things started to go down because there was no stick and no carrot anymore. The EU said, well, you're members of the EU, now we can't help you and we cannot, let's say, sanction you for anything what you do in this area. And our politicians used that big deal. So when the former Minister of Defense, now the Prime Minister, tried to abolish the Anti-Corruption Commission, the European Commission formally couldn't do anything, but they did a lot informally. And it was just because of them and because of our Constitutional Court who declared the law which was abolishing the Commission as anti-constitutional, the Commission survived. But surprise, surprise, the same person, now in the position of the Prime Minister, was engaged again in another suspicious activity since our country was buying armed vehicles from Finland, and he was sentenced by the court for trading in influence. He received 3 years of imprisonment, but then when he exhausted all, let's say, appeals at the regular courts, he finally turned to the Constitutional Court, which was and still is typically politically composed Constitutional Court, And while he was already serving the sentence, the Constitutional Court said, well, you know, his basic rights were breached in the court procedure, so you have to release him, and the procedure has to start all over again, because everybody knew that the statute of limitation will appear. So he was released, and the statute of limitation appeared. So formally, he's innocent. My mandate in the commission expired in 2010, and since I knew that because we were doing our work properly, I knew that I will not get any more jobs in the public sector, establish my own consultancy company, where I'm still functioning. When it comes to Slovenia, until 2018, all elections were characterized by strong, let's say, involvement of all candidates in debates on corruption. They were saying, we will fight corruption, you're corrupt, we're not corrupt, so if you elect us, we will basically destroy corruption. We even had a case, I think it was in 2014. The political party was established 14 days before the day of the elections. They didn't even have the program. The only what they were saying is, they were saying we are honest and we will not be corrupt. And they won the elections. In 2018, our politicians simply stopped talking about corruption. And although, you know, we were pressed all the time by the EU saying that, well, you have to fight corruption, you know, fighting corruption, although our politicians were saying that this is a priority, it was absolutely no priority, neither for the police, nor for the prosecution, nor for the judiciary. Well, judiciary cannot decide which cases they will get, so we cannot speak that, we cannot blame them for lack of cases, because the prosecution simply didn't deliver them the cases. So now we are in this situation where nobody speaks about corruption. We still have the Anticorruption Commission, and they have broken every single teeth out of this commission. We are waiting for 1 year now to get a new anti-corruption strategy. The last one I wrote in 2003, and it was adopted in 2004. So we have an anti-corruption national strategy which is 20 years old, and of course it doesn't serve any purpose anymore. So, and why did I say at the beginning that this, you can pull up some parallels between Moldova and Slovenia? Simply because we have oligarchs, we have a politician, at least one, but even more, who simply think that by winning on elections, it means that the state is your prey. So they consider the state budget as an ATM where they can collect all the money they can when they're in positions. And this guy is doing this in a very clever manner, using his media, his political friends at home and abroad, and from time to time he returns to power. So he was again the prime minister between 2020 and 2022 during the COVID time, and then they did so many stupid things that in the elections 2022, people simply voted them out, and we got a new prime minister and a new government. So you have oligarchs. We don't have. We just got some oligarchs after the independence, but by far not as rich and as strong, and I can also say as corrupt as your oligarchs. But here we have this one person who's basically trying all the time to capture the state. And when I say capture the state, I realized basically he's not even so much into political power anymore. He's into money, and that's all. So, and since the rest of the politics is fighting such an approach, instead of developing Slovenia forward, we have a constant fight between a person who is trying to pull Slovenia back in some older times, and other politicians who basically win the election just by saying, he's corrupt, we are not like him, so vote for us. But in practical terms, they also don't know how to, let's say, run the country, run the government, how to be honest. We have almost the same situation when it comes to the situation in media. How do I know that? You know, the CCIA is now preparing the report number 5, which will discuss the role of Moldovan media in the fight against corruption. And we saw very, very difficult situation. We see very difficult situation there too. So you will see when we'll publish this report, this will be in 1 month or 2, and that you are in the difficult situation. Let's say like people like Alina Radu and some other colleagues which deal with investigative journalism, independent investigative journalism, are really under big pressure in your country. We have investigative journalists in our country who are, of course, under pressure, but not not as strong as the journalists in your country. So, to cut the long story short, Moldova is on a good way to join the EU, but even on joining EU, it will not solve all of your problems. No, the level of democracy does not automatically influence the decrease of corruption in the country. So joining the EU is a huge opportunity, but it is not guaranteed that the next day after the accession the corruption will start to fall. So many efforts will be needed in Moldova to fight corruption, to develop democracy, and to join the EU, but this will not stop on the day of the accession. The activities will simply have to continue also the day after the accession. Otherwise, Moldova will share, let's say, the destiny of Slovenia, but even more, let's say, Romania and Bulgaria, who went even through worse problems. So there's a huge workload ahead of you. As much as I know you are able, willing, and capable to deal with it, you just don't have the let's say, the luxury to give up. And when you fight corruption, you don't give up. And I think you heard Alina already saying this. So let me end with this one. Anybody who's fighting corruption cannot give up. To then he or she is not the real fighter against corruption. And thank you so much. Now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Actually, we've had such a situation when Plahotniuc somehow was forgiven for monopolizing all of the state leverages, for capturing the state, provided that he will free us from Russians, will take us into the European Union. So such a song was trying to be played. And I hope that Alina Radu and other honest people like her have learned her lessons and now they are vigilant, and we will not end up in a situation that you have described, that when we enter the European Union, which hopefully will happen in near future, will be relieved from accountability and will be in the situation of Idzina. But we'll see. Thank you very much. We'll keep an eye on your reports, and I believe that it would be very useful to refer to your experience. Thank you very much. And now, let's continue with the next speaker, Emilia Sherkan. I told you that she was declared by the whole political class in government as the enemy of the Romanian security. But actually, she was trying to bring in light Victor Ponta for an intellectual crime, for plagiarism. And I remember that when I met her, I challenged our colleague, and I said, well, is this really a crime? He just copied. We do the same when we prepare our degree papers. We just borrow the ideas one from the other. And she was very surprised. Don't you understand the proportion of plagiarism when this is done by Victor Ponta, a former prosecutor, and this whole team participating in plagiarism are people preparing their PhD papers, and on the basis of their degrees are appointed in key positions in security, in defense, and so on. So she was very courageous to uncover it, and my question is, I'm sorry for asking this so directly, but how could you explain your lack for not ending up like Magnitsky? I have not ended up like Magnitsky, but I had my share of troubles as well. Last week, another case was reopened against me. It had a Moldovan leg, to put it like this, because the Romanian criminals that wanted to compromise me, that wanted to kill me morally, that's how I called it, used a crime convicted by Romania, Cristian Rizia, very well known in the Republic of Moldova. And now he is in jail, as you know, because he was expelled last year. The Ministry of Justice has not issued a press release last year telling that Rizia was expelled. They did not use the word expelling, though this was what actually happened. I wrote a book about Victor Ponta, but it is not me who revealed the situation. I started to write about plagiarism used by high-ranking politicians and officials in Romania in 2015, when the deputy prime minister, a newly appointed interim minister, used to be Gabriel Oprea. I don't know if you know him, but Gabriel Oprea is a shady guy who is very well infiltrated in the system, has many connections in the political class, in intelligence service, and so on. He is a doctor, university professor at the Academy of Romanian Intelligence Service and coordinator of PhD students. But if you have watched interviews with him, you have noticed that for him it's very difficult to communicate a message in a clear and understandable way. So it was the moment when he was appointed as an interim prime minister, because Victor Ponta traveled to Turkey to have a surgery, so he could not leave the country ungoverned without a prime minister. So then I was in the kitchen watching news on my laptop. So when I've heard this news, I left everything and went to the library to do some research. And why did I want to do this? Because 2 years previously, I passed my PhD degree, and it was a very difficult test for me. To have a proper PhD paper, you need a lot of mental and emotional investments. I gave up. If you don't know how to copy others' ideas, yes, you're right. So during those 3 years, I gave up my professional life. I did not meet my friends. I spent 6 months in France on a scholarship, and I lived literally in the library during those years. So I went to the library, and after 2 years I called a former colleague, because after finishing the PhD course I started to teach in the university, and somehow I started to get used to the idea that I will not go back into the media. So I left the library, I called a former colleague, and I asked whether he was interested to publish my article about the copied PhD degree of Gabriel Oprea, who is a doctor, PhD coordinator, Minister of Interiors, an interim Prime Minister, general with 4 stars, and academician. He had a personal academia only to get the title of academician. I published this story, and it was like pulling a string, which resulted into collapsing a whole system. So, following the people coordinated by Gabriel Oprea, it was the first deputy of the Romanian Intelligence Service coordinated by Oprea, the former head of the Intelligence Service of Romania, the Deputy Prosecutor General of Romania. Now he is a judge in the High Court. other judges, prosecutors, police officers, very strong people, not to mention politicians. He used to have about 22 people that he coordinated. And I started to write about some of them. In 6 weeks, 6 or 7 cases were published. What happened next? They blocked the access to PhD papers in the library. So, oh my God, we are so many that have PhD papers in Romania, and so many of them are copied. So if we leave this woman to have access to all of the papers, what happens to us? She will need about 1 year to bring all of us down. So it was a shock for me to go to the library to make a request. As I usually used to do, I would go to the library, fill in a form, and then have access to the PhD degree. And then she said, no, you cannot have it. Now we are digitalizing the PhD papers, and you will have access on a computer, and that computer did not have access to the internet and does not have any ports to copy the information. Since then, 9 years have passed. Lots of things have happened. Meanwhile, so far I have written about 50 cases of plagiarism, and I don't know, maybe this is an inspirational story. Maybe we could call it like this, but I wouldn't call it necessarily a success story. Why? Well, I've written about 50 cases. The most recent one is Mircea Joan, Deputy Secretary General of NATO. So now he announced his candidacy for the President of Romania. During this whole period, only one person resigned, and there were no other options because he had the position of Minister of Education, Sorin Câmpeanu. I call him the grey eminence in my book, the person who was behind the system and made the system, designed the system in such a way that now it's almost impossible, because we have huge prosecutors and judges that have copied a PhD doctor. So now it's almost impossible to withdraw the degree of PhD. And well, in Moldova, maybe there are not so many people that work in politics with a PhD degree. And I'm glad that you have not imported this model from Romania. Let me explain why Romanian politicians and people in high-ranking positions want to have scientific degrees. Politicians wanted to have scientific degrees because in the 90s they have noticed a kind of pattern, so they have realized that the first governments after the 90s consisted of politicians coming either from the academia, from the university environment, because in 1992, there were no, to put it like this, available candidates, because many of them had connections with the Communist Party. So the pool of available candidates was very narrow and mainly consisted of academia and university representatives. So many people, many ministers came directly from universities. They were professors or researchers in the research institutes. So everyone understood that if they wanted to end up in important positions, they needed to have a PhD degree. After that, during the Adrian Năstase government, 2000-2004, a lot of benefits were offered for PhD degrees holders, 15% plus to the salary. And back then the salaries were very low, so a PhD degree was a very good addition to your salary. You could become a general in the army or have a higher position in police if you had a PhD degree, avoiding a very complicated exam. Next, if you wanted to become member of the bar, the exam was very difficult So it was easier to get a PhD degree and access immediately the bar. Victor Ponta used this backdoor. Teachers in pre-university education, if they wanted to have the first didactic degree, it was easier for them to get a PhD degree rather than to work years and years. So in Romania, after 1990, more than 80,000 PhD degrees were offered. There are many politicians, many people from the intelligence service, from the judiciary, from various government structures, central offices, local governments, who decided to get their degree. Why this is harmful for the society, and why do I call it moral corruption? Because people who have a PhD degree should prove that they have a certain competence and they are very good professionals, including academic competence certified by this scientific degree. Whereas we see very often that these are mediocre people. Well, when I say mediocre, it means mid-level. So these mid-level people having PhD degrees who have literally compromised the idea of scientific research, compromised the reputation of the academia, and this wouldn't have happened unless there was someone in the academia to work together with them. So somebody should want to get the PhD degree, and on the other side there should be someone willing to give it to them. So this happened because the academia had their share of guilt. And to answer to your question, no, it was not easy for me, because when I started that I cannot stop, Gabriel Oprea, the first thing that he understood, he sent his representative. I have no acquaintances, no friends among politicians. So Gabriel Oprea was trying, like a mad person, to find someone who knows me from the politicians. But I did not have any acquaintance, any friend among politicians. So it was difficult for him to find. So Gabriel Oprea sent a kind of convoy to me, trying to buy me. Of course, he did not manage, but he did not stop. He tried to compromise me publicly, including with this story that was reopened by the justice. It was turned into a criminal case. It was reopened by the judiciary, and this story, my story, with this file was included in all of the reports starting with 2002. They also threatened to kill me. The rector and pro-rector of the police academy were condemned to 3 years of imprisonment. It was a suspended sanction, conditional sanction. And they involved Christian Rizzi as well. So this situation was referred to in all reports issued by the U.S. Department of State, reports issued by various international and European organizations. But the judiciary tried to hide this, because a print screen that I sent to the police was leaked, and in half an hour it was already on the website of Rizia. So for you to understand the level of those involved, this case was closed. The prosecutor said that there is no violation of the private life. I protested for 16 days in December in front of the General Prosecution Office, showing one of that picture when I left the bathroom in my apartment, wrapped in towels. So I said, this is a picture of me. Isn't it a violation of my private life? So maybe you feel some shame when you see this picture. I don't know if they felt this feeling of shame, but I am glad that a judge, well, actually 2 judges from the High Court, one in April and one now, last week, reopened the case, saying that the prosecutor made a subjective assessment of the evidence. So we should not use such words in justice as subjective, because justice is about establishing and unrevealing the truth and protecting citizens when they are in vulnerable situations. Of course, when I asked you, I'm glad that you have not ended up as Magnitsky. I meant imprisoned. I have not even thought about the tragic outcome of Mr. Magnitsky. We will try to help with your protection as much as we can using the tools that we have. We will continue the discussion with Emilia. I have a set of questions for her that have been pondering. I have been pondering over them for a while already, but we will continue our dialogue with Emilia during her book launch. And I invite now Andrei Borovik, Executive Director, Transparency International Ukraine. So he will speak about inspirational stories. Andrei, please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was thinking about what to tell the inspirational story, because I worked for TI Ukraine last 8 years, and my organization was involved in a number of successful stories, but also some of them were not so successful that were happening in Ukraine. And I thought that it would be good and it would be worth to highlight the role of one of the stakeholders that has been particularly active in Ukraine since probably since the independence, but very active since 2014, since the Revolution of Dignity. And as we gather here to reflect the impact of anti-corruption champions, and I truly think that any reform that happening in the country and it is successful, the main champion of this is the society, because society is the main beneficiary. But as in every society, there is always a group of people who are a little bit more, let's say, active and more involved. And I'm talking about the civil society organizations, the CSOs. And that these organizations are not only driving change in Ukraine, they are essential to Ukrainian progress in future. Ukrainian civil society was and continue to be a powerful source and force for change. And over the past decade, CSOs have been a cornerstone of many, let's say, democratic transformations. The thing is that in Ukraine for the last 10 years, there happened a number of the reforms, despite what can you read in especially in the Western media, including anti-corruption. But not every reform that happened in Ukraine was presented as under the anti-corruption source, but it's definitely had some anti-corruption measures and actual lowering the corruption in the country. And I'm talking about starting from anti-corruption institutions which were built from scratch, about the reforms in the healthcare, police, financial sector, public procurement, privatization process, opening data, which owned by the government, transparency. Many of the things involved the expertise of experts and just ordinary activists. And if to talk about the fight against corruption, I would say that the impact of the civil society and investigative journalists was very strong and undeniable. One of the examples of such an activity was this, as I said, establishment of anti-corruption institutions, and in particular, the High Anti-Corruption Court, which, by the way, last week recently marked its 5th anniversary. And this institution, as an example, was built under the new rules and procedures, and has become kind of a model, at least for now, of integrity, and that Ukrainian judicial bodies, even the new one, can handle the high-profile cases with a certain level of transparency and fairness. And this is not only my opinion, because of nature of work. I also talk to the private practitioners, those who defend the suspects, They all say that, yes, it's tough, but at least it looks fair and much more interesting than when you go to the ordinary and old-fashioned courts, which are now still not reformed, not changed much, despite that we are in progress. Another significant area where the CSOs played important role was a public procurement. Public procurement, which is probably the most problematic area in literally every country, because it's all about the money and the state spending money and buying something from the private individuals. And I'm proud that organizations like I am representing Transparency International Ukraine were very active in this process, and that the ProZorro system was implemented also including thanks to the CSOs. Because ProZorro has revolutionized public procurement, making the process more transparent and reducing to some level the corruption. I'm not saying that now public procurement is corruption-free, because ProZorro is only the mechanism how to deal with that, but it gives more transparency. We still have some issues with accountability, but transparency was first and important step, and I truly believe that some part of those guys who used to make money with tripled or quadrupled prices for any goods which are bought by the government were some way cut it off. But we still have a challenge in the sense of the accountability, but this is a thing which needs time. And actually, I can give you many other examples where the experts and activists sparked a nationwide change. But if I were you, I would ask what makes the Ukrainian CSOs kind of special. And I think that the first and foremost, it's their sustainability. Despite any political changes, economic struggles, or the war which we have now, Ukrainian CSOs have shown their remarkable adaptability. Because the CSOs exactly were on the 24th of February 2022, were those who immediately reacted on the war and started joining the army, providing aid, and starting doing the international advocacy. Secondly, I would say that CSOs is about adaptability and speed. And that in times of crisis, usually CSOs react very quickly. And as I said, during the when Russia launched its invasion, exactly the CSOs swiftly mobilized and provided aid, supported both locally and internationally. Or if we talk a few years before, during the pandemic, CSOs were the first ones who were partnering with the journalists and pushing the government to ensure the decent level of transparency around the COVID-related spending, becoming the watchdogs for the government actions. And this is that not always happens in the Western countries. As an example, our chapter yesterday or Monday just presented their research saying that there is, let's say, issues with UK governmental spending on pandemic COVID expenditures. And it raised lots of questions how it could happen and why the society just find out about this now. And the third, perhaps the most important thing that is unique in some sense Ukrainian civil society, that CSOs in Ukraine are not just watchdogs. And I always was saying that watchdogs is only one of the potential functions for the CSOs. If there is a need and you can find a good partner, it's always good to collaborate. To collaborate with the government if they need your support, or if you can find an open-minded government officials and the politicians. So I would say collaboration is also a very good feature. And as a good example of this collaboration, I was already mentioning public procurement system ProZorro, because TI Ukraine was actually even the legally owner of the IT product and then gave it for free to the government. The whole work around the advocacy and development of the reform was done within the golden triangle, as we call it. It was a cooperation between the CSOs, businesses, and open-minded government officials and politicians. And this collaborative approach has been extremely important in this reform and also in other reforms like the privatization, deregulation, judicial reform, or anti-corruption efforts. And by working together, we ensure that reforms are not just voted properly, but also effectively implemented. And today, when Ukraine as well as Moldova is towards the European integration, I'm sure that the CSOs are the crucial in aligning our standards and practices with European norms. They are not just advocating for legislative changes, they are actively ensuring that these reforms are executed successfully. And their work is essential for the Ukraine's ambition of joining the European community and building the future grounded in democracy and the rule of law. And to the very end, in closing, I would say that I much agree with all the speakers. I also would say that, let's say, scientific work and dissertations in Ukraine is still a problematic area. Or I would agree with Draga Kos saying that I think that not only anti-corruption fight or any other reform, it's always a never-ending story, in a good sense. You cannot just stop fighting the corruption saying, now this is enough, we reached this level, we are so high in that ranking, now we can do nothing. It's a daily job, it's about the mindset, it's about evolution, because there is nothing stable. If you stay unstable, probably you will lose some standards. But I think that it's extremely important also to mark your own achievements, what you have for today. You may change your priorities for some time, but still you need to remember that despite that you change the system, then you can do your watchdog to keep the system on track. And I think that with one step at a time, it is possible to change any system, any institution, and any country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borovic. I would like to use the occasion to ask you right after your speech something that probably is on the mind of several people here. So, analyzing your specific information, actually, there's two questions. Whether in times of war, the watchdogs have become more permissive because those who are corrupted are maybe fighting against the Russians, and such situations can be seen here also. So through disclosures from, or maybe through these disclosures from corrupt people, we offer information to the opponent. So, or maybe by revealing these corrupt, those incompetent, maybe we make the state, the society more vulnerable in the face of the Russian opponent. And this is what the known activist Arestovich says, who says that incompetence is even more dangerous than corruption, especially in times of war. Could you comment on these topics a bit? We have lost the image of Mr. Borovic. Can he hear us? We no longer have the connection.
Now can you hear me?
No, perfect.
The first six months since the full-scale Russian invasion, so somewhere till autumn 2022, I would say that even us, we were always thinking twice what we can do in order to help the country to fight back, and there was almost no criticism around the government or the corruption or the inefficiency, wherever we will call the problem and whatever the problem was. But then later, actually, the journalists and the CSO started doing the work which they supposed to do. So they show the corruption cases, they start asking the questions, they started proposing the solutions. And now, in the sense of this, of the corruption, everybody understands. I think understood immediately when the Russia invaded that corruption is the question of the national security. Because when we looking back in time and talking about, for example, pro-Russian parties, we remember the stories that the leaders of these pro-Russian parties were going to Moscow or before the elections or in the middle of their term for some consultations or some, from my point of view, really ridiculous reasons. Pro-Russian parties were financed by Russia. They definitely, and this is against the law, and I would say that this is a political corruption when the foreign state invests in your political parties. And that's why it's a matter of the national security. Because of war, there is another kind of a problem arised, is actually the problem within the military sector, within the many national security agencies. That was probably a mistake, let's say, was not paying much attention to what was happening in the military sector or the Ministry of Defense in the past. But now there is a different initiatives and processes is ongoing in the reform of these institutions, because everybody understands that we need more efficient national security sector, and it can be more efficient only if the process and operations will change. That will immediately close some loopholes for the corruption. So, and this work is ongoing. And if talking about in general, unfortunately, not all people in the country or the state officials understand that the corruption is the problem for the country to survive in this fight. We still can hear lots of corruption cases, but what is good that we, for the last 10 years, we built up anti-corruption institutions, which can almost, let's say 9 out of 10 cases react immediately on these cases. And that's why we have the case of the suspicion to the, for now, it happened last year, ex-head of the Supreme Court of the country, a number of cases against the deputy ministers or the ex-ministers. And I think this makes the biggest difference, that if we were in 2014 and the full-scale invasion in the sense how it is happening now happened those days, I think it would be much harder for us to stand, because still for the last 10 years we made lots of changes in different institutions and systems in order to make the state stronger. So definitely corruption is a national security issue, and that's why it should be addressed with fully and seriously.
Thank you so much. I would say Slava Ukraina, and thank you for holding up for us also. I would like to move on to the debates. Of course, I'm taking advantage of the situation, and I'll ask you this speculative maybe question. Are your efforts to unveil corruption, incompetence, political corruption, helping those who are trying to look smarter, to become more ingenious? Because then Konstantin Botnari built a fence that is like in Washington, showing that they couldn't care less after your stories on the mentions. Maybe this is an unequal, unfair competition, and they are the winners. I would like all three of you to answer this question, and maybe we can maybe this way we give solutions, ideas to the opponents, to the other side. I will start. Nobody promised that this would be easy, that we would work for 1 year or 5 and we'll receive a prize, and so on. This has always been challenging. We've had a lot of obstacles. If we had this series of articles on mentions, the prosecutor's office didn't come and seize all these mentions. But change happened differently than we expected. For example, we received a notification that a judge sued us, and her request was, you should never mention my name, you should never write about my wealth, about my family and children again. First of all, you are sad when you see that a judge would think that you can forbid a newspaper to use a name of a judge. And they requested 1 million lei damage because we harm her when we mention her name in our articles. We just continued writing, we went to court, and in the end she was dismissed. Only one judge was dismissed. We didn't pay this million lei, which was a success. This was several years ago. And I think we are the most sued publication in Moldova. We still have 6 ongoing cases. So this year we received a decision from the court on one case which is in favor of our newspaper. Of course, I'm stressed about this, not to lose the case in court, not to lose money, not to damage our reputation. And I see that that judge signed the decision. And I'm looking at my attorney and I'm asking, what is this? She said, don't worry, it's her daughter-in-law. So one problem was solved. Now the daughters-in-law should not answer for the sins of their parents or parents-in-law, but they should know that we will continue to monitor them. And the question, will Shore be punished? Yes, but not in the manner I want today or tomorrow or yesterday. This will happen differently, and we need to be creative. They never get tired because they have a lot to lose, more than any of us. What can I lose? A place where I struggle in the redaction. And this is why they are very creative. They are ready to do anything to save their life and happiness. My happiness is not related to the newspaper necessarily.
This is obviously not never-ending competition, but by doing it for almost 15 years, I would tell you that the picture today, which we observe, compared to what it was in year 2009, 2012, or 13, is completely different. Just to give you a couple of examples, if we were talking about Latvian financial system, it was all about laundering money from Russia. If we were talking about generally Baltic financial system, at least half of that it was about laundering money from Russia, and it's not the case anymore. It's next to impossible for criminals now to open accounts, to siphon money from through these jurisdictions. If we are talking about rules inside the banks, about accepting money, if we are talking about knowing your clients' rules in relation to any financial operations, they today are on a completely different level. Does it mean that they completely stop doing it? No, definitely they use all type of new mechanisms, whether it's crypto or we've spotted also fintech, which they used, and so on and so forth. But my evaluation that effectively order of magnitude of this operation went down dramatically, because several sectors effectively became more or less unavailable for them. And the struggle should continue. And the main thing is actually is attitude of the society. So, and that's why the work which colleagues are doing is so important, because this is the opinion of the society that this is not acceptable, which is changing the world. Thank you.
Emilia, dumneata, deci...
Emilia, I understand you are working with the gold mine. So the oil, well, did this plagiarism stop now? Have they become more careful? There's a good side to what I have done so far, because at least after 2016, the law has changed, and the rules, procedures, and regulations on how the PhD theses are drafted have changed. The coordinating teachers and the universities are paying more attention to this. In 2017, mandatory courses for ethics and integrity in the academia were introduced in university. This is a step forward, so there are some changes that have been made, but we have no guarantees. Plagiarism has different forms. The simplest one is the copy-paste one. So you take 70 pages. We had Petretoba, former Ministry of Interior, who took 70 pages from a different PhD thesis, added this to his, and added 5 from here, 7 from there, and there you have your 200 pages. And now I see that what's happening is that it's very difficult to prove that 70 pages copied from somewhere else is plagiarism. This is what happens. But we can have mediocre PhD thesis. And we have a more subtle plagiarism, plagiarism of ideas, of structures, or by paraphrasing someone else's words. So we are discussing about a phenomenon. In the first book that I wrote, I named it the plant or issuing thesis, how this destroys the basis of a nation, and how plagiarism and this situation affects the structures, the basis of a country. And this was made possible. I hope that the situation will change in the future. I just hope. I don't have any certainties. They are careful. This is what I'm saying. They won't copy 70 pages as they are. They will change here and there a bit. Now I would like to challenge you, Emilia, regarding your book launch. So you have put them in the spotlight. They've become more careful, more innovating. And in the book, you say that you are sorry that this has shifted the focus on the techniques of plagiarism, and we don't focus on the quality of the thesis. Yes, I would like to tell you a funny story. At least we should laugh a bit. In 2018, I went to the police academy. I wrote a lot about the police academy, and this is why I was threatened. So I went to the police academy. when the PhD thesis of the former Minister of Education, Liviu Pop, was defended. He was an interim Minister of Education during the Ponta government. So first I went to the library, I saw the thesis, I understood it was copied, although I had been writing about this for 2-3 years. So I took part there in that session. And of course, everyone was congratulating him. They were saying, this is an exceptional thesis, please publish it afterwards. And the procedure says that after the thesis is defended, people can ask questions. And I raised my hand. It was only me and one colleague journalist who were not from that environment, from the commission. And I said, do you know that this thesis is copied? I asked this question to the commission. At that point, their whole world fell down. So we heard the chairs moving on the floor. They went out of the room. They came back after less than 5 minutes and they said, we'll suspend this session, we will not give them the PhD degree. Then, since this was the police academy, you had to inform them that you would come because you cannot just enter. So I asked to be granted access to take part at 2 other sessions for the PhD thesis that should have been defended. But these people did not show up when they found out that I would be present. It's difficult to change things in a system that involves so many actors. But if I were to finger point, I would say that the academia and the teachers who allowed this and who lowered the standards and looked away are more guilty than those who did the plagiarism. I was thinking about your name. I was growing up with Mowgli. Your name sounds like the evil character in Mowgli, Shere Khan. And you fought with the Prime Minister and other people. And I recommend you to take a look at what is written in this book. Liceanu made me pay attention to this, how Adriana Stase comes to this exam with the black Mercedes. And then there were the years when Victor Ponta made everyone important around himself turn against Emilia so that his image could be cleared, but he didn't manage to do this. And I wrote this this book about Ponta, but I will need to write a book about Nicolae Ciucă also. I wish you success. Dragocos mentioned the similarities and about the sources of corruption. And I was thinking that we still have Pandora's box that will open after joining the EU, because now we don't have so many leverages to touch this topic. This is Transnistria. What happens in terms of ammunition, tanks, bombs, and so on. This will surprise us in the future, but I think that we have enough experience and enough strength not to give up. So, Drago, we will need your experience. We will need you to go into that Pandora's box called Transnistria, because this will be a very difficult legacy for the Republic of Moldova if it is accepted, and I hope this will happen in the EU.
Well, just like to correct you a little bit. I think Moldova has more tools at its disposal to fight corruption in the process of adhering to the EU. Because it's not only Moldova interested in joining the EU, it's also the EU interested in Moldova joining the EU, which means EU can help you a lot in fighting corruption. Of course, let's say EU sets conditions which have to be fulfilled for countries joining the EU. But the European Union is also assisting countries in fulfilling these conditions. So, and when this happens, let's say EU is really heavily engaged in many countries when it comes to fighting corruption. But of course, only if the EU, or European Commissions, if they see that the country is really doing something in the fight against corruption. What will happen after the accession is the following. You will become the full-fledged members of the European Public Prosecutor's Office, full-fledged member, let's say you'll be able to use the services of Olaf, European Anti-Fraud Office, which we can do, I think, already now. So not much will change in this area, but let's say the pressure, the stick and the carrot which European Union can apply now for Moldova is much stronger now than it will be after the accession. The Bulgaria and Romania joined in 2007, and the European Union, based on which bad experience with, let's say, the big group of countries, including Slovenia, which joined in 2004, introduced something which is called cooperation and verification mechanism for both countries, Romania and Bulgaria, basically sort of monitoring what these two countries are doing in fighting corruption, and they have suffered a lot. They lost a lot of, let's say, European money because they did not fight corruption to the extent expected by the EU. Mostly Bulgaria was really did bad in this area, so they lost really a lot of money. Now, after that, Croatia joined, but there was no this cooperation verification mechanism anymore, and I think it would be a good thing if European Union would reconsider introducing this mechanism for any new country which will join, not because of this possible distrust to the governments of these countries, but simply because in all of the countries, as I've mentioned already, after the day of the accession, the anti-corruption efforts started to fade away. So this will be something which for sure will be, let's say, which will happen in Moldova too. I have to say that what I respect immensely with Moldova, but also with Ukraine, because I was listening to what Andrei is saying, no, you're developing sort of inner strength in fighting corruption, which means that your institutions, public institutions, media, and individuals are, because being exposed to so many different forms of very, let's say, problematic or strong pressure, are developing sort of a resilience which enables them to fight corruption in any circumstance, which means that they will be continuing fighting corruption even when situation will improve, hopefully after the accession to the EU too. Moldova has a big problem, though, in some other area which is not related to corruption. And basically, this is, let's say, the economic problems which many of European countries are facing today. And you see this, and we, the foreigners coming to Moldova and living in Moldova, we see this, that let's say that some politicians, some figures in Moldova are using or misusing this fact, economic problems of the country, simply blaming those who would like to fight corruption as they would be personally responsible for these problems. So I see, let's say, currently the importance of the foreign assistance in two different ways when it comes to fighting corruption. First, general type of assistance means helping Moldova to develop its economy to the level which we enable, if not all, but at least majority of the citizens of Moldova to earn enough for, let's say, for decent survival. That would be the general type of assistance. And of course, then the second one is a special type, which is assistance in fighting corruption. A lot has been invested in this area already, but there's a problem. You see, I didn't do a research. I simply pulled together the data from Transparency International Berlin, not the Corruption Perception Index. It's another index which is called Global Corruption Barometer, which assesses what's the percentage of people paying bribes in different countries. And I took into consideration all countries of, let's say, Eastern Europe, well, up to Moldova. And I realized basically that's only Albania where the percentage of people paying bribes went down in the last 15, 20 years. In all other countries, either this level, the percentage stay the same level, that would be Slovenia. In other countries, including, let's say, the EU member states, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, but also Moldova, this percentage went up. So we're doing something wrong. Now, so much money has been invested in the fight against corruption in all these countries, but the situation is worsening. So maybe now the time has come that you sit down and contemplate a bit, what can we do different or what can we do better that, let's say, all the resources spent, and when I say resources, I mean the money, the experts, everything else, would be followed by some more positive achievements. Because now we can, of course, we see the improvements, but in general terms, this is not being proven by the statistical data yet. And we will have to start doing things differently, or we will have to start doing new things. The main point is we are not as successful as we wanted to be.
Thank you, Drago. Of course, maybe at next edition of the forum we will discuss these issues as well. In Moldova, we have this intertwining of between smaller scale and large scale corruption with political motivations. When Shor would pay the retired people, inviting them to protest in front of the government, so he's paying 300 lei a day to some people brought from Orhei, which is 15 euro, and they are also persuaded that they are fighting for a noble case. They are fighting from releasing Moldova from Romanian interference, US influence, LGBT, and so on. So this is the biggest danger. These people are somehow hypnotized. They see themselves as saviors of the Republic of Moldova. Or there are some people who, for 20 euro, are ready to sacrifice the future of their children because they get this 20 euro to solve their personal situation and personal problems today. And the previous Prime Minister Sturza talked to them in his recent statement. He said, it's in vain that you think that you have solved the situation by kissing the hands of Putin, because if Putin comes, you will be the first to go down. But I'm sorry for this, I do not want to make any long speeches. Drago, I also share the admiration for investigative journalists. My admiration for Emilia, who is fighting like a Don Quixote, though there are little chances to succeed, but she still continues fighting, and Alina Radu, who has dedicated her life to defend public money. But frankly speaking, if I am to tell you a secret, when Voronin used to be the president, and he used to have an advisor who knew very well the economics, and he would tell out public, there are lots of money that can be moved around. Let's use this money and take advantage of it. So maybe he was aware of the laundromat offer and he was very tempted to participate in this scheme as well. And we were surprised to find out later that we had the case at Pădurea Domnească and other miracles as well. Sorry for monopolizing this session, Q&A session. Now you have a small... We have the possibility up to 5 p.m. to ask questions, so both people in the room and those watching us online will have the possibility to ask questions. So let me tell you a secret. You have a possibility to exercise now, because at the book launching there are a couple of books available, and Emilia will sign them and give them to the people who will ask the most ingenious questions. So use this opportunity to learn. Do not ask the ingenious questions now, keep them for the book launching, but this book is in a very high demand. Our colleagues from the Center of Legal Resources Center from Moldova really had to invest their efforts to find a copy of it and to get hold of a copy of it. So if you have questions, please, Mr. Guzun. I'm not doing it for the sake of getting a copy of the book. I have a question. I have lived many of the experiences presented here. When I was a student at the Academy of Economic Studies, I asked the rector whether he has reviewed the papers, the scientific degree papers, are they checked for plagiarism? And they said, yes, we have a proper software to do so, and no plagiarism was identified. And the next issue I'd like to address is the laundromat and the theft of the billion. Mrs. Radu and many other colleagues of hers have written kilometers of words. Sometimes they looked like evidence for cases in the court. Many of the elements would hint to people in the highest position in the country, or people that are holding or used to hold positions at the high level, mid-level, but nevertheless with powers to influence things. Vadim, you have listed the leaders of criminal groups in Russia. You presented the banks involved. You have referred to some people from within the banks that have opened some doors to you, offered some data to you. And I believe that you had such guys not only from the banking system. And you also have a white list of those who contributed to investigations of the Russian laundry, because to prepare a list or a document that the US government adopts as the Magnitsky Act needs a lot of effort and commitment, and then the replication of the same mechanism by other countries is done as a result of joining efforts to fight not only to fight corruption not only in Russia but in other countries as well. The Republic of Moldova also passed a law with sanctions by which it aligned to the international sanctions, and it also passed a national law how to apply these sanctions. So my question is the following: do you have a so-called white list, for example, to say, do you mean whistleblowers? Maybe they have received some awards. No, I'm not interested in awards, but I'm wondering if there are a list, so-called white list, of people who contributed, who helped, because there are people in any country, in Moldova as well, that take this commitment and assume to report such crimes. Do you have such a list? Have you made such an evaluation of whistleblowers or a kind of white list of people?
So we definitely have a blacklist of people who should be blacklisted, and those people, some of them already end up being sanctioned in many places under these laws which we are talking about. As far as concerned the white list, obviously there were quite a few people who helped us to collect information, to tell us stories about these people, and so on and so forth. And these people are enormously courageous, and for them it's like Sergei Magnitsky is probably a model, although he died, but his legacy is actually supporting many people all across the globe who are willing to say the word about what is happening. Because if you think thoroughly what he was doing, it was purely on the moral principles. He believed that all these government officials have no right to steal millions or hundreds of millions from population, from like elderly and so on and so forth. And again, whistleblowing is a very difficult work, let's put it this way. And you heard this probably about Danske, where name of the whistleblower is known, but there are many other cases, and probably our colleagues journalists knows even more than we about it, especially with all these leaks, which effectively changed the world for the last, whatever, 15 years, Panama Papers, BVI papers, Landramats, and so on and so forth. Many of them are based on the leaks, and they're changing the world with publishing all these stories. We're having some unprecedented efforts when journalists all across the globe are doing some kind of joint investigation or simultaneous investigations. And all this is based on this white list which you're talking about. But this is not a very awarding list. I mean, I don't think that these people would like to be in the public. And although we have much shorter list, I would suppose that we will keep these names to ourselves because we do care about safety of these people.
I have a question to Alina Radu, speaking about the investigative work in the journalism area. I can make a parallel to the special investigative work conducted by law enforcement officials. It is based on a legal document such as Criminal Procedure Code or Law number 59 on the special investigative work. So according to these laws, we need the ordinance of the prosecutor or the mandate of the investigative judge, because by conducting this special investigative measures, we violate some of the rights of the people, such as the inviolability of the public property and so on. So the question is, what is the legal background of your work? Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. I think you should visit our office to see how we work. We work with open information. We have access to databases that are open to public. And when we make investigations undercover, and we do not do this very often, but for example, you've seen our investigation with reporters that revealed the short scheme with so-called leased protesters. So what they have done, they entered the social network, they joined some groups where anyone can enter. You don't need the consent of any prosecutor. You have my consent because Facebook belongs to everyone. So they understood where these groups are organized. They traveled to Orhei. They said, hello, I want to participate in your protest as well. They said, okay, come and protest. So these are such type of discussions. They did not have some devices on them. They had a mobile phone connected to internet. That's all. Do you have the right to use your mobile phone? Yes, you do. Do you have the right to travel to Orhei? Yes, you do. Do you have the right to join various Facebook or Telegram groups? Yes, you do. Do you have the right to talk to people on your bus to Orhei? Yes, you have. So they had a phone with them and they talk to people. Do we go to protest? Yes, we go. What should we do there? What should we tell them? How much will I get for this? So do you have the right to ask us such questions? Yes. So they did it for several days. They went to Orhei, then together with those people traveled to Chisinau. And then they published these articles, and as a result of these articles, the police and the prosecutors saw that, look, we have evidence. I do not go in people's private homes. We use open information, we use our courage, interest, curiosity, and we use public interest as a guide, because our readers want that, and we serve them. So please forget about all of these ordinances, come to us, and together we'll do a good job. But as a continuation of this question, on the basis of your experience, can you tell us 2 laws that are barriers in your work? Or maybe some articles in the European Convention for Human Rights that hinder your work. Yes, we had a lot of interdictions, for example, regarding the use of personal data and databases, especially during the Plahotniuc period, were damaged. For example, the register of business entities. To find out who is the owner of a company, it's not that easy, because if a company belongs to Vasile Botnaru, in the Republic of Moldova, there are about 50 people with the same name. So I have to check according to the first name, but it's not available. I have to pay to get this information. You are in a more advantageous situation. You can find out their actual name. So this will narrow the scope of investigation. And we had many other problems with the access to databases. The information belongs to people, but sometimes governments decide not to fully open it to journalists. But we are fighting it. We fought a bit, they opened it up, and then they closed it. We resumed our fight, they opened it again, and so on and so forth. Now they are under the protection of personal data. So if you want to check if Vasile Botnaru, for example, has a number of businesses, so I have to pay. Yes, sure, I pay for it, and nobody is giving this money to me. I have to raise money. And after that, I am called by Vasile Botnaru asking me, why have you checked my assets? And I have to explain. But sometimes I will check and I will not find anything. I have a reasonable doubt that will not be justified. And then I will not publish anything. And I am asked, but why have you checked? Why didn't you write anything as a result of your checks? So I feel a lot of limitations, but I should not give up. If we gave up, we will end up like Russia. So we have to continue our fight. And if we have limitations, we have to bite the hand that is protecting us from having access to those data. I think that you asked about the investigations about the mentions of judges, because this is about personal data or private life. We have a universal principle that is applicable everywhere in Romania, Moldova, and so on. We work for public interest when there are certain issues, even if it is about private life. But if the public interest prevails, including European courts and international courts have established that no right is superior, or there are few superior rights, But the right to information can be superior in certain circumstances to the right to private life. So it is the right of citizens to know certain things that might affect them in a significant way. So the public interest is superior in such cases. And we are guided by this, and this public interest allows us to enter a private area. Do we have any other competitors? Lydia Mitrofan, a judge. I wanted very much to participate in these sessions, to listen to the opinion of journalists, because journalists are writing about us, and during such events, some of us feel frustrated, others feel afraid. So we have to understand why it is important to write, why it is important to explain. But nevertheless, I have a question regarding the Magnitsky case. I have studied this case and the fortune of Sergei Magnitsky. And maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that Magnitsky case is a failure of humankind, not a failure of those that unveiled this scheme. This is a failure of humankind, and I explain you why. Sergei Magnitsky, I don't know if you've read the acts of torture that he was subjected to, and those that tortured him were not sanctioned, they were protected. The money was not returned to the state, and the European states were not able to prevent such a crime, such a money laundering crime, and nobody guarantees that a similar crime will not take place in the future. A Magnitsky case had a consequence in the Russian Federation. Karamurza, journalist who wrote about the judge who condemned him and because of whom he was included in the list of persons sanctioned by USA in 2022. Karamurza was sanctioned for 27 years of prison. So the state was not able to protect its citizens. So I have a question. I have not found an answer to this question. Why these cases, in particular the case of Magnitsky, that resulted in some movements and the blacklist, has not generated empathy and effects in the Russian Federation. Why these cases are important? Because we have to learn from them, and we have to know what to do in order not to end up in the same situation. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you for a very good question. First of all, the case of Magnitsky, especially when he died, it got a lot of sympathy, and it was the most probably sound case at the moment. I mean, when he died back in 2009, it was public outcry all over the place. And it was one of the few cases, if not the only one, when the kind of public oversight commission, which was under the president of Russian Federation, considered personally this case and issued its decision despite the all opposition and despite the all kind of obstacles of the law enforcement. They issued quite a dramatic, let's say, independent judgment of what had happened and supported everything which Sergei Magnitsky did and blamed those who actually went after him in this manner. Unfortunately, so much happened in Russia since then. I mean, Russia is scaling back, downwards, unfortunately, way down. And the tragedies which happened with Sergei had been followed by many other tragedies. And today, as you properly mentioned, Vladimir Karamurza, who luckily was exchanged recently, but before that he was sentenced for 25 years, not only for helping with Magnitsky sanctions, but mainly because of his opposition to Ukrainian war. And what is happening in Russia when people are just by making a click on Facebook getting 7 years prison, which is even more severe than any criminal cases or criminal accusations, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, it shows you the level of society and the level of morale of the society when people do not care. And today, when thousands and thousands have been killed on the battlefield, I mean, it's more and more difficult to draw people's attention to every person's life. But generally speaking, as I already told, Sergei Magnitsky is a hero not only for Russians, he's a hero all across the globe. Posthumously, he was awarded by Transparency International. And the fact that the laws are named by his name is actually, again, some kind of a recognition of what he did. And we've been involved in this. We're hearing voices from all over the world, from all over dictatorships all over the world, where people are saying that Magnitsky sanctions is like a last resort for them to draw attention to what is happening in their countries, to what is happening with them or their relatives or their friends, and so on and so forth. And at least it's some kind of punishment, if not punishment, but then raising the price for those who are going after human rights activists, after anti-corruption activists, is those type of sanctions. So definitely the legacy and his name actually is changing the world as we speak.
I agree with the judge. She's formulated the question in such a way, but we are still in process. We are still searching for answers. Yes, it's logically to ask who gave birth to Putin, Russia or the West, when the West was trying to get on better terms with Yeltsin. Maybe that is the origin of the birth of Putin, when they were trying to get on better terms with Yeltsin by saving the disastrous situation that was in Russia back then. The same can be said that Putin hid behind some strategic objectives of nationalization and so on in order to keep his money, in order to keep his wealth, or to revenge for not being able to spend all of his money himself or his daughters or his two assumed sons that will have a totally unhappy life. They'll have to be in hidings all their lives. Are there any other questions? The last call for questions. If not, we are not forced to stay here until 5 p.m. I would like to thank very much panel speakers, especially those who had the courage, patience, and willingness to stay with us online. Thank you, Drago Kos and Andrei Borovik. If you are still with us, thank you very much for your participation. And I invite you to take your seats in the room, because here on the stage we will have the next speakers to formulate conclusions. Of course, we invite Ilya Kirtak, President of Legal Resources Center from Moldova. So I think it would be polite for him to invite the next speakers. So I believe that these are the most important conclusions that will be made public, because this is what everyone is waiting for. I am very much curious to continue this discussion with Mr. Kirtak during a show at Vocea Basarabiei. to present this information for those at the grassroots, because this was a topic that has to be addressed, meaning how to communicate to citizens. This is very important, because if we do not have a good cooperation, then we'll have these perceptions in the society about the judiciary, about the vetting process. I was writing yesterday in the evening a story, an article about vetting. So, in the title of that article, I wrote, maybe we would need a vetting for priests. Think about it. Because with this Orthodox church subordinated to Moscow, we are in a kind of paradoxical situation. So when the government saw the real situation in the judiciary, they understood that that's a horrible situation and a vetting is needed to clean what is happening there. And I believe that we need to replicate the same approach in a condition when we have 30 priests going to get their instructions at the KGB church, and churchgoers accepted. Even the Rome Pope says that you should not close the churches in Ukraine because a prayer will never damage. But if you are praying for war, is it safe to do so? So when writing this article, I remembered that when the vetting discussion started, I thought about the origin of this word vetting. It comes from veterinary, and in the 19th century it was clear vetting was the job of a veterinary doctor. The veterinary doctor would check the horses before sending them competitions and selecting the best horses. Of course, maybe it's not that good that we use this word to describe the test for judges and prosecutors, but we would pretend that we do not know the origin of this word. So vetting now means detailed check not only of people but of information and so on. I should not tell you more details because you know all of them. So now we have reached the conclusion. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Botnaru. Dear as usually, we are making a summary in the second day. We will not summarize them a lot. I think we need the information to be processed a bit, but I think that the Center for Legal Resources will come with such a summary for the institutions, for those who attended our forum and so on. We started the session by thanking you, and I would like to thank again the institutions involved, and especially the Ministry of Justice, because they were basically present in each panel. And it's important to have the presence of those who develop the policies in the judiciary and who, in debates, can receive different recommendations. What stuck with me is a quote from Madame Fait Charge d'Affaires on the rule of law. The rule of law is the basis for the functioning of society. It's not just an abstract doctrine. And I understood how deep this quote is, because if we want to have the rule of law in the Republic of Moldova, it's not enough to promote information about the rule of law, but we need to have strong institutions that will form this rule of law, so that this is not just something we strive towards, this is not just abstract doctrine. We've learned yesterday and today from the speakers whom I'd like to thank for their involvement. Are some ideas that are memorable, that will be probably part of that digest. We need progress in the reform. We need to have a moderate speed. The self-management bodies of prosecutors and judges are just the beginning. There's political support for EU accession, and this was mentioned, and this strong support for the reforms that are needed for EU membership. Some panelists were very positive, and they said that maybe we can do this by 2028, not 2030. And the minister from Latvia said that one indicator is the trust of the society. So the trust of the society in the judiciary is essential, and it has to be built, because if the reforms are implemented correctly, it will influence the trust in the judiciary. Regarding the vetting process, we've discussed with the members of the assessment commissions the lessons learned, and an opinion is that the assessment process, although imperfect, is necessary to strengthen the independence of judges and to exclude those without integrity. But the process needs clarity, predictability, transparency from the side of authorities, and better communication on the criteria and the results. Obviously, there are challenges in the vetting process, the lack of qualified staff, the high volume of information, the poor cooperation of institutions, and sometimes of the candidates involved in this process. In terms of recommendations, we need to continue the dialogue between institutions and development partners to adjust the assessment criteria in line with international mechanisms and to strengthen the administrative capacities. Another important topic is the digitalization of the judiciary. What we found out is that in the Republic of Moldova, we have the basis for continuing such efforts. We are discussing about creating an agency for the digitalization in the legal system, and we need high investments that will facilitate access to justice and enhance transparency and reduce the time for different processes. It's also important to understand that AI is a fashionable word, but not a practical application these days. And although it can help us in quickly processing a high volume of information, we need to ensure transparency and to have human oversight. Even in repetitive cases, simple cases, we need to have human oversight from a judge or an actor who can check the information. Of course, when we are discussing about information technologies, we have risks and limitations, and therefore we need to take into account the bias that can be put into an algorithm. And if what was included in the algorithm is harming, this can lead to vulnerabilities in terms of human rights, but also for those who are the most vulnerable and have interaction with the judiciary. This is why we need transparent, responsible systems, and we need to make sure we have human supervision. Today we discussed about the fight against corruption, and the red thread in the speeches of all speakers is that corruption is an obstacle to EU accession, and in order to become members of the European family, we need to have progress. We have different strategies, plans, programs, laws that are very good and for which a lot of work has been done. What's important is to have an honest implementation, and we also need a more efficient communication both between the anti-corruption institutions and with the society to increase trust in the actions of the anti-corruption agencies. I put down several ideas, but I would like to put forward 10, 12 recommendations that will be part of that document, but I think they should be some bullet points as future directions for action. We have this moderate speed of reform, but we have clear political support for them. And the development partners and the EU ambassador said that such speed is enough. What matters is to have high-level changes that lead to effects. An improved dialogue between institutions, a better communication between the institutions and the self-governing bodies, the increase of salaries. I think this is a topic that has come about in each edition of the forum. The question is whether we should have these increases now or after the vetting. However, a significant increase can only be offered to those who have passed the vetting process to make sure we have a corruption-free system. Although we also need to strengthen the such guarantees for the others involved in the fight against corruption. The digitalization, I mentioned this agency, and the streamlining of the functioning of the system, responsibility and transparency in the implementation of AI, the resilience against corruption. In order to develop efficient legal tools, we need to communicate these results to the wide public. International cooperation, training. I would like to conclude this part of the discussion with a few lessons learned. And I hope each of those who listen to the discussions in the panel will go home, and my recommendation is to watch fully the last panel of this forum, because we have these inspirational stories from the champions of the anti-corruption fight who managed to influence phenomena through their own examples. So we are discussing about money laundering, and the fight against this meant that the whole international community has understood the effects, and now they can fight together. Combating plagiarism. At the core, all these phenomena are speaking about the need to foster an integrity culture in the society. This is why courage is the fuel of the members of the last panel. Please watch it in full. In terms of the Forum on Justice, we ensure you that we continue to closely monitor the progress of the relevant institutions so that they promote the reform of the judiciary and the fight against corruption. We salute their openness, although not full openness, at least the partial openness of most of the institutions involved. And we believe that this continuous dialogue is necessary in order to polish the plans for the future. I would like to thank you for these 2 days. I would like to thank the technical team, the team of the Center for Legal Resources, and as promised, the digest will be available in the next weeks and will include a synthesis of the 4 discussion panels. They will include the most important questions that were asked and the recommendations that will be disseminated to all those who contributed to this forum. This is all for now, and if needed, we will discuss further. Thank you, Mr. Kirtak. As a Facebook user, I would like to say that we already have a micro digest. You might have seen on Facebook that these panels were presented. There are photos, short summaries. So congratulations for the impeccable work of the team in the Center for Legal Resources. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you. And thank you, dear Mr. Kirtoaka. The challenge from the Ministry of Justice to find a replacement since the Minister Mihailov Moraru could not be present in this session. As an advisor from the EU on Justice and Prosecutor's Office, I have marked 1 year since I've been working for the Ministry of Justice, the Prosecutor General's Office, and other institutions. What does this mean? That the previous edition of the forum has been the best introduction to the ongoing issues and reforms in Moldova. We are discussing about society as a whole and everything that was happening in the judiciary. And after extending my mission to the Republic of Moldova, I have connected many elements from the daily monitoring done by myself. I use Zero de Gard and the Facebook accounts of the vetting commissions. I'm also familiarized with other instruments, the site of the parliament, the sites of the councils to see how the meetings are going. This is why this presentation of the context has been a good one. It has shown progress. And I don't want to insist. His Excellency Ambassador Majix showed that progress is good, that the work is towards the final part of the first third. This is how I see it. And this was confirmed by the assessments of the minister. However, we can see that we have a solid basis, and this gives us hope. I will mention a few words without pretending that I have the power to transform something in practice, just like Madam Moraru would have had since she is a member of the government. But we need to understand that real effects will be seen in society when we have the new structures functioning and dealing with the load. because there will be cases where that will be in favor and some cases that will be rejected. We are discussing about the Supreme Court of Justice, and this is functioning now after the candidates pass the vetting. We also have progress in the area of prosecutors, and I'm really happy based on my positions in the prosecutor's office in Romania. Well, I'd like to see how fast they can prioritize the cases to be solved. I have no doubts as an external observer on the correct perception of professionals that the EU agenda and the desire to become an EU member state come from the will of the citizens of this country to have prosperity, safety, to be able to fully exercise their rights in a democracy and to see integrity. We need to see how far we've come since 2014, and I've understood that there were some missed moments. In 2014, I was working at the permanent representative office of Romania to Brussels, and the fact that the support for the agreement from Romania was high. So we worked towards welcoming these states. We'll see how this progresses. This intergovernmental meeting in 2024 is also very important. Madam Minister is probably preparing the bilateral screening because the justice sector will start and will end the negotiations. We are discussing about the certainty that the most difficult relationships can be solved with impartiality by professionals. I will discuss a bit about the external assessment that all society is watching, but not everyone knows the procedure. Some highlights are just the results of emotions. But those who understand this procedure, well, I'd like to highlight something else. Comparing to 2023, we have two functioning commissions. We have decisions of the Supreme Court. We have people who can understand where they stand, and we also have a certainty. There are some red lines in the case law of ECHR, and we need to look at the criteria for the assessment of ethical integrity. This was not mentioned in vain. I made some calculations, and we understood that Moldova lost 8.3 million euro only between 2018 and 2023 for ECHR convictions. This is in general. We should not think that all convictions on Article 3 are due to judges or prosecutors. This is many are related to lack of action from the penitentiary system. However, the protection that needs to be assured, the fairness of the procedure, are not things that we cannot achieve. In Romania, I think in 1997, 1998, we had case law that allowed people to complain or challenge the decisions to not proceed further, but we could not take part in the court sessions and say, please reject this because this is inadmissible. So where we have decisions in the vetting process, we can mention that maturity can be judged by the maturity of the commissions on one side and the Superior Council of the Magistrates have had a certain position on the doubts on interpreters. I apologize in front of the interpreters. I'm speaking too fast again. The President of the Second Commission has mentioned that the subjects of vetting have all the sources and sources from the outside in order to understand what they are required to do. Although we haven't progressed a lot for most of the judges and prosecutors, they can prepare their documents starting from 2012. They can gather the relevant information for the commissions, and when the individual questionnaires are sent, it will be easier to add the information for the last months of 2024. The intervention of the judge from the Chișinău court and the challenge for those who will develop the databases. This is due to the fact that some EU directives foresee mechanisms for periodic reporting of a minimum set of data. So we should think thoroughly before we do something, because what we do should help us in the medium and long term. Also, based on today's discussions that were very powerful in the anti-corruption area and that were focused on efficiency and on the use of existing tools, I would like to mention that I understood the need to follow the beneficial owner. Also, I know from the inside what international cooperation means, and it's obvious that it is more present in the area of organized crime than in anti-corruption. But we should not lose sight of it in the effort to strengthen the capacities of judges and prosecutors. This is because one of the aspects of cooperation at the EU level involves the contact between the judicial institutions who will not have the central authorities for many things. This means that if we receive a request, we will need to reply quickly. These are the e-codex applications that are meant to make the job of professionals easier. I've been working daily in the Ministry of Justice, and I would like to share with you that dialogue for modernizing and developing the legislation is very close with all actors. It's important to have this in order to have efficient, pragmatic solutions from the point of view of time, and solutions that would approach vulnerabilities in combating corruption and the recovery of criminal assets. Because by taking part in the sessions of the working groups in this area, I was amazed to see how the flow of requests between authorities allowed the person in case to make sure that this asset disappeared, and then it is much more difficult to recover it. The efforts to fight corruption can have effects for the society, and I have the approval of the minister to touch upon this topic. We can have the social reuse of these assets because these goods need to come back to the citizens. we have this collaboration, and it is supported, and it is inspirational. The presence of the judge Mitrofan was just meant to feel how the discussions are going. I can say that she's inspiring us in terms of how to better organize the activity in a court. The result is not good because I'm mentioning it. It's good because it had results. The way we have the daily management in the Chisinau court is very important. His Excellency Ambassador Mazeix said that these effects need to go beyond Chisinau to be felt by people in Balți or the southern part of the country. I mean the duration of the trials and all the standards that we know. So thank you, Mr. Chirtoacă, for having received me as an expert who can bring some ideas on the efforts of the authorities in the Republic of Moldova and about the collaboration which I think is very good with the civil society in this effort for modernization, for joining the EU. And I would like to thank you also, Mr. Botnar, for allowing me to use this time. Maybe I shouldn't have an intervention after these conclusions. I just have a technical announcement. I don't know the exact time when the book launch will take place. At 6 p.m.? Okay. We have some time to have a walk, to drink a coffee. Please do not leave because, as promised, Emilia has a lot to say, and we will let her talk to you during the book launch. And some people will be lucky enough to have a copy that is signed by the author. I think this is the most important page of this forum. This is the cherry on the cake. The cake is Guguț's hat, the preferred cake in Moldova. Please do not leave. And if you have the possibility, ask your colleagues who have been in the office to come back. Would like to thank the team that has offered us technical support, who have streamed us online, who have been on Facebook, who have interpreted. And I see the comfort of this assistance. I was not left alone. I received the necessary support in order to have a successful forum as the team in the Center for Legal Resources intended. Thank you.